What's up, weirdos? I'm Felicia and I like scary movies, and happy almost Halloween. So tomorrow I'm going to be doing my annual Halloween live stream. I'm going to be doing it at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will be getting into my Mrs. Lovett cosplay. Oof, I'm so excited about this costume. And then of course Travis is also dressing up as Sweeney Todd, and we're going to look good. I'm going to do his makeup, my whole big hair. It's gonna be good. So make sure you don't miss that, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. But now for today's video. I asked for you guys to send me your personal paranormal experiences that can be ghosts or aliens or even local legends if you have them. A bunch of you sent some stuff in and I haven't read it yet. I'm gonna read it live on camera so I can be as genuinely creeped out as you in the audience will be. If you want to get really spooky, maybe get a little drink, maybe a little wine or a little, White Claw, turn the lights down low, and let's read some stories. Now this one is from Stephanie, so thank you for sending this in. Let's do it. This occurred 20 years ago when I was in my mid-teens. I was watching TV around 8 p.m. or so when I noticed something outside. I was alone in the living room, but there were others home in other parts of the house. So I lived out in the mountains of Montana. The nearest neighbor's house was higher up on the hill than ours, less than 200 yards away. Above their house, maybe 50 yards in the sky, in parentheses, sorry, I'm not good at describing distances, me neither, it's chill, was a hovering craft. A hovering craft, perfectly still. It was octagonal in shape with 3 rows of different colored lights, a small row of white, a longer row of red, and then another small row of white. I watched this in absolute terror and confusion for several seconds, then shouted for my siblings while simultaneously trying to get out of the recliner. I actually tripped because I forgot to put my foot part of the chair down. And my foot got all tangled up. So my big toe bleeding, me shouting, and when my siblings came from the other rooms, of course, the hovering craft was gone. This is very well written. Good job, Stephanie. Every time I tell this story, I draw the craft. I can still visually see it so clearly 20 years later. I am met with a lot of skepticism. I never claim to have seen proof of aliens, and I'm no aircraft expert. But there's a pretty big government base not that far from where I lived. I don't know why the government would be testing aircrafts at 8 p.m., but there you go. Thanks for listening and everything you do. It was dark out, so I could only see the numerous lights formed into a shape maybe the size of a small sedan. That's like serious. I mean, that sounds freaking real to me. And then she sent a little drawing of the shape of the lights, which was very sweet. Man, sounds like you saw some aliens to me, Stephanie. I believe you 1000%. That stuff happens. Especially out in Montana. What a perfect place to fly your UFO around. Also this year, the freaking government came out and was just like, yeah, these are UFOs. We don't know what these are. And released, or it's footage that had already been released, but they basically clarified the fact that they also did not know what these were, and so they're UFOs, they're unidentified flying objects. And if the government doesn't know, I'm just saying it's probably aliens. So that's fun. Okay, next up, Lee from Horror Pals, who has been on this channel many times, texted me a story. Okay, so about 7 years ago, my fam was going on a cruise that I wasn't going on because I don't like the ocean. Understandable. So the day before they leave, I was just sitting and drawing and binging A Haunting on Discovery Channel, which naturally made me an expert on ghosts. Of course it did, Lee. Of course it did. So that night, I'm hanging with my friend, and he's telling me about his old house in Old Bridge and how it used to be haunted. Old Bridge is built on a lot of indigenous burial grounds. Classic. Classic haunting. And he said how he would hear inhuman screams from his basement, and how he heard clear as day in his ear, "Mike, help me," in his brother's voice, while his brother would be playing video games 2 floors up. Yikes. So me being the Discovery educated expert, I'm like, oh, that sounds like a demon. And he's like, yeah, I've always been scared of it following me to my current house. So I'm like, just bless this house, dude. So we call my friend Misty, who's a Wiccan and very versed in the occult, and we're like, how do we do this? And she starts telling us, and like a minute or so into the call, it starts dropping in and out. Like she'll be talking, and then it's just silence. And then we start hearing this man's voice whispering through the white noise. And we can't make out what he's saying, but it's whispering something, and this goes on for 20 seconds. And then there's this really loud shriek, and my phone disconnects. So I'm like, ah. And I look over at Mike, and he's white as a sheet and shaking, and I'm like, what's wrong? And he's like, that's the exact sound that used to come from my basement. And that's why I don't fuck with the supernatural anymore. Boom. That's a great story. I would also like a follow-up with Mike. Has he had any other experiences in his new house? If you could just leave a little comment down below, Lee, I would love to know. And were you able to bless the house? Like, what is the follow-up here? But that's a really good story. That's really good. Now we're gonna move over to YouTube. Let's see if there's any on here. All right, this is from Lady Scarface Angel. The most terrifying thing I ever experienced was the possessed lady at Siskin Hospital when I worked on the orthopedic floor. Ooh, sorry. I just got like really excited. Okay. Occasionally, we got other patients that weren't ortho. This was a patient who had dementia. She could be so sweet, and she could also be very violent. Sometimes she would throw things in her room, the telephone, her water jug, etc. I worked the graveyard shift, and about 3 a.m. one morning, aka the witching hour, by the way, I see a shadow go across the hall and into her room. Ah! Her light went off at that moment, so I go down the hall to answer it. Soon as I walk in the door, she's laying in her bed, grinning from ear to ear, swaying her head from side to side, laughing. The most evil grin I've ever seen, and the most disturbing laugh I've ever heard. Oh my God, I'm gonna have nightmares. The shadowy figure was in the corner by the bed. I flipped the light switch and it was gone. To this day, I'm convinced some of the crazy patients might actually be possessed. Nursing home graveyard shifts are creepy too. I've always heard stories about seeing deceased loved ones right before an elderly patient passes. This is very true. I've seen a few of my patients talking to someone I couldn't see when they were actively dying. Coherent patients too, or they'll see their beloved deceased pets. They'll talk to them and interact with them just like normal. I could always predict a death this way. I just knew they were going to die in a couple of days, and sure enough, they would. I've had to prepare a lot of bodies for funeral home pickup working in the nursing home. That was always pretty creepy too. Dead bodies will build up gas and sometimes move and make sounds. Pretty freaky. Like Lady Scarface Angel. That story was like too freaking good. Okay, that was like, first of all, I believe you. Second of all, that's so scary. Also, like knowing when someone's gonna die because they start seeing like people from the other side welcoming them over, basically. Like, whew. But the scariest thing is, I mean, this line right here, laying in her bed, grinning ear to ear, swaying her head side to side, laughing. Like, I would just scream and run out of the room. Like, I don't even know. I don't know what I would do. So, good on you. Also, thank you for being a nurse in these very strange times. I'm sure you've had to go through so much the last 8 or 9 months. So, thank you. And dang it, thank you for that good story. Whew. Okay. All right, next up we have Jay Donovan, a horror movie club fave. Let's get into this one. Back in Knoxville, I kept waking up at 4:44 a.m. There were swirling shadows and a tall, dark figure wearing a large cowboy hat that stood in the corner of the bedroom. Ooh. When I asked it for a name, it whistled a whole note and 2 half notes. I would try that if I could whistle, but it's one talent I don't have. On the last night of this happening, I woke up at 4:31 a.m. There were no shadows or figures. I went into the kitchen and discovered it was filled with smoke. The oven had been left on with baked potatoes because they take so long. I had completely forgot about them. After dealing with the oven, I opened all the windows and put a fan by the door and went outside. I suddenly felt overwhelmed with a laughter that wasn't my own. I felt as if they were telling me they were watching out for me. But it was terrifying all the same. Ooh, that's freaking crazy. And I'm so grateful they were looking out for you and that you woke up, because that could have been a disaster. Also, what you described at the beginning of the story sounds a lot like sleep paralysis. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Nightmare. It's like a documentary about sleep paralysis. But most of the people in that documentary describe seeing a tall man with a large hat at the foot of their bed. Freaking scary. And you didn't say anything about, like, being paralyzed. So I'm glad that wasn't part of your experience, I hope. But that's so crazy. That's really good. That's really good. Okay, next up, we have Mark, another Horror Movie Club favorite. Thank you for sending. The scariest experience I've had with the paranormal was when I was about 8, and I kept hearing something tapping on my window. Now I slept on the second floor, so it was high up for a wolf or a fox to climb up, and plus everything was locked. So I went back to bed, and about the time I started to fall back asleep, something sliced my right shoulder almost to the bone. I still have the scar on my shoulder and halfway down my back. To this day, no one talks about it and they all refuse to believe me. Is that true, Mark? I mean, that's freaking scary. If something sliced you in the shoulder down your back like a knife? I mean, was there an investigation? I don't even know. Like, my first instinct before I would go to paranormal would be like someone broke into the house, like into the window or something. Oh my God, well, I am so sorry that happened to you. That's so freaking scary. And definitely a thing out of nightmares. Okay, and now we have one more. This is from the horror miser Monty G, who has a great YouTube channel. Make sure you go and check him out. And here we go. On the night before my graduation from Pierce College, where I was getting my bachelor's degree, I was sleeping well, but then I swore I heard my mother's voice calling me. She was telling me how proud she was of her baby Huey. Keep in mind, my mommy passed away several years ago. I swore I could feel and smell her presence that night. Ooh, that one's like kind of beautiful. It's like she wanted to like come back and say she was proud of you. I think that's very beautiful. And I believe you. I believe all of you, honestly. Thank you all so much for sending all of those in. And now I will tell you my story. I already told you my alien story. So this isn't really a story, this first part, but my friend Tara from Frederick, Maryland, where I grew up, messaged me and she was like, you have to mention the fact that we lived so close to where the Blair Witch Project was filmed, which is true. That was filmed in Burkittsville, Maryland, which is literally like 20-minute drive from Frederick. And actually my neighbor where I lived, his college roommate was like somehow involved with making the film. And I always thought that was like the coolest thing in the world. But that's one thing. I grew up very close to there. And then my other story is that when I was, I think around 12 or 13, I was in my friend's basement and we had been going through these boxes and found an old wooden Ouija board, like old school, so freaking creepy looking, not the freaking toy store one. It was serious. And we decided we were going to talk to some ghosts, okay? And we start doing the Ouija board. We both like swear up and down. And we talked about this like later in life as well. Like we swore up and down that this really happened. That we started talking to someone. And we started talking to this ghost or spirit or something that he talked about that he was hung. And he was still like lingering around because he had died via hanging. And we asked him specifically because at the time we were like very interested in witchcraft, and we asked him to give us a spell. We said like, if you're really dead, we want you to like find a spell to give us. And he then spelled out, bends and fangs allow these ways to make an object levitate. And I will never forget that because I know that her 12-year-old mind and my 12-year-old mind would not have been able to just make that up on the spot. And so I have never forgotten it. It is burned into my brain. And I was and I still am to this day, fully convinced that we talked to a ghost. And weirdly enough, I can't remember his name, but I remember the spell. Isn't that so strange? But it was really quite scary, and we did say goodbye at the end. And I can say thankfully I was never bothered again by this ghost, which is something that I've heard other people that have not been so lucky. So I would not recommend necessarily messing around with Ouija boards. Though on my Sleepy Hollow trip, we did try a Ouija board, but no one was there to talk to us. Everyone, like, we were having fun and, you know, but I'm always like kind of serious about it, like a little serious. And no one was there. No one was there to talk to. So it's like, okay, well, no one was there. But I will never forget that first experience because it was so visceral and so real and so scary. But yeah, that's my story. Thanks, guys. Once again, tomorrow is Halloween. I will be live streaming at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on my channel, and I'll see you then. Have a nice scream, people. Bye.